Hi, and welcome back to another video here focusing on some T&L tips to help you with any of your teaching duties here at the college. Today we're specifically focusing on what I'm calling the worst case scenario canvas shell, and this is specifically designed in case of some of the scenarios that we're experiencing here in fall 2021 with the Caldor fire and also with, of course, the continuation of COVID-19. So let's jump in now and I'll take you through a chart that really kind of maps out all the possible scenarios that you might encounter here if the case is that you have to switch your class up, whether it's a late start or perhaps even switching modality if you're teaching face-to-face, moving into DE and also EVE classes. So let's jump on here and take a look. Okay, as we start this conversation here about like worst case scenarios in our classes in fall 2021, I first want to say that, we wish, all of us I know collectively wish everyone well, all the students, staff, faculty who have been displaced because of the Caldor fire. As I'm creating this video, it's still in a very unknown time in terms of the spread of the fire. We don't know what's going to happen. We also show appreciation to all those fire personnel, frontline responders, first responders who are helping with this and literally risking their lives to protect South Lake Tahoe, parts of Nevada, as this giant fire spreads in ways that we haven't seen in the past. So I think it's really important to acknowledge that, because it's not a time for any of us in which we're maybe even thinking about Canvas and thinking about our classes. But there's like a reality here in fall 2021, as we already have shifted from the start date of September 13th to the 20th to how we deal with this uncertainty. And let me also say in creating this video that I am just guessing. I don't have any inside information about decisions. I get the same decisions that the college sends out from the president's office in our emails. And so I don't have any inside knowledge. I'm guessing at things today. And I'm also, with this idea of uncertainty, I'm assuming that September 20 as a start date could change in certain respects. I think we all assume that. I was reading today that the fire containment is still unknown. And, smoke is still unknown, so things could shift and change. So let's just prepare for that. I can imagine how it is for some of you dealing with this level of uncertainty, dealing with not having a home, potentially being away from your home. How are you going to teach your classes in the fall? How are you going to come back to campus? All these kinds of questions. So in creating this video, the uncertainty that we're experiencing, I think, is just going to really impact us in the fall, including in terms of our stress and our abilities, our students' abilities as well. So all of us are going to be really challenged. And one of the things I can say just from personal experience dealing with very serious medical crises on multiple fronts, literally at the same time, is that you get good at it, you figure out ways to plan as best you can, and to really take action and take control and try to make sure that the things that are within your control are being addressed. And so I think, with that being said, not to be too preachy about this, I think that there are things that we can do even given this massive uncertainty that we're experiencing here in fall 2021. So one of the things I'm going to talk about with this then is what I'm calling a worst case scenario. So like this WTS class. What's the worst case scenario and how do we need to prepare for fall 2021? Can we prepare? And I think the answer is yes, we can certainly prepare in some respects. So I tried to think about this over the week, my own experiences teaching ISP, face-to-face, DE, and EVE, and think what might happen? And then how can we prepare for those situations and adapt our teaching? So we'll come back to this chart in a second. My real concern probably is ISP and face-to-face. And certainly in terms of the modality in which we're teaching, we could say some things might change dramatically, some things might not change at all. In terms of ISP, we know that built into ISP is some level of uncertainty. We know that there's stuff that happens in the CDC that we can't control. There's stuff that happens in the postal system that we can't control. And thus, we're often left teaching ISP in situations where we have to grade a lot of items at once. We're concerned about whether or not students have access, say, to Module 1 and your feedback and grading before they work on Module 2. For those things that we can't control, I think we try to do the best that we can and maybe explain to students that we'll be more flexible in terms of accepting late work or whatever. Now, I don't want to say too much about this because it is so in flux. I know that what's happening with the CDC with COVID, even before the fires, was a big deal. What about our students who are part of the fire camps, and how are they dealing with this potentially in the fall if they're still fighting these fires? So that uncertainty, I think, really does relate not to modality, but it relates to dates and calendars and time, and thinking about how we can adapt our grading, our final grades with the IP grades and all that kind of stuff. And so grades is a part of this, and final grades are a part of this, and then also the grading of your class definitely would be a part of this. So kind of thinking about ISP, I think that uncertainty will continue in the fall, and the adaptation there is probably stuff that we're used to already in terms of some of the lateness of work, grading issues, getting in final grades, calendars, all that kind of stuff. Faculty may be getting modules very late to start the quarter. Again, a lot of stuff out of the control of the college because it's happening with these CDC calendars. And if you watch the news, read the news, currently I know CDC is going to be dealing with even more issues of COVID and vaccination, all that kind of stuff. So ISP is definitely, I would say, a concern for the fall, as we're accustomed to with some of these challenges of dates, COVID, and now the fires adding another issue there. Now, let me say about DE, I think DE is almost like a check mark. I think we're okay. With the case of DE, we all realize that, of course, our stress, our student stress, our schedules, our student schedules, like those of you who have evacuated for the fire, I really worry about, like, okay, you might, who knows what's going to happen in a few weeks. You might be able to get back to your home, but then you're dealing with the stress of not knowing if your home was going to survive the fire. Unfortunately, if some of you lose your homes, like was the case with many LTCC employees with the Angora fire, that is a stress that is unimaginable, and it takes certainly a long time to deal with something like that, that level of loss and replacing and rebuilding and all that kind of stuff, which takes hours and hours dealing with insurance companies, construction, all that kind of stuff. So like all those uncertainties for sure will impact DE, all our DE instructors, all our staff related to it. So I'm not suggesting there won't be impacts. There will be huge mental impacts on DE instruction in the fall. The one good news, if there is good news in these crazy times, is you can do what we call is a date switch. So a date switch means that you're going to go in, and I do recommend you check out my handout on this. This you'll find in my Adjust Dates video, and it's also, of course, covered in this video. So some very short steps or quick steps we can take. We're going to go onto our Canvas shell, click on Assignments, and then we're going to click on this icon here for the settings. Then third is click Assignment Dates. We then go on here and click the title. That's going to select every single graded assignment in your class. So this is like the quick way of doing things. Step 5 is click Batch Edit. Step 6 will be to shift the dates. In my case, I'm going to go in my Cultural Anthro class and switch every single assignment by 7 dates. I have some things due on Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays. So by doing a 7-day shift, I know it's going to exactly be what I need it to be. So if we're starting on the 20th now, instead of the 13th, which is the official word from the president's office, then this is an easy fix for me because I only have to shift things once by 7 days. The good news about it, again, if there's good news in these stressful times, is if we get another alert, let's say hypothetically, the college can't open on the 20th, or we shift everything to virtual on the 20th. Again, I'm not saying this is going to happen. I'm guessing. I'm totally guessing here. So don't take any of this as the word of what's going to happen. I'm just trying to, kind of as an anthropologist in me and as someone who's dealt with personal crises and having to shift my whole life in a very short amount of time due to medical emergencies, I've had to think about this for a lot of time, like many of you have. In fact, I'm still thinking about it with medical situations as we speak. So I'm always trying to plan ahead. Okay, if I can't be available on this day and I have to shift things, how can I shift my work? How can I shift my home life to accommodate this? So what I'm saying is, if it's beyond 7 days, if it has to be 10 days, then we can easily go back in and do this entire operation once again in 6 steps to get our DE class ready. So aside from the stress, which is massive, and all the uncertainty, what I'm saying is the operation inside of Canvas to deal with that uncertainty is one operation. It's doing your date switch and that's the extent of it. Now, all the other stuff, dealing with your stress as an instructor, dealing with your student stress, that is a whole different matter. But I'm trying to look at very technical opportunities here to deal with some of these issues we're going to have in the fall. So this, I would say, is the number one concern I have about the fall. It's our face-to-face. It's not our DE. Again, our ISP has challenges because of all those COVID issues and mailing issues that we've been talking about well before the Caldor fire. Again, DE, we can do some date switches. But for face-to-face, we have to really think more creatively about how to adapt. So where we end up is really thinking about this particular chart here and kind of the different scenarios. Before we get to this chart, what I might suggest to you is you think about this on your own. Just take your own situation. If you're teaching a face-to-face class, maybe map out what are the challenges. Would you possibly have to do a modality switch? Would you have to do a date switch, or both? And by modality switches, what I'm saying is, we'll just kind of go through this chart. I have modality, scenario, modality shift, and then the Canvas shell specifics that you might think about in terms of including in your class. So starting at the top, every single class, all class have what we call basic Canvas shell. Please check out my video on the basic Canvas shell. What I've suggested to you in it is you have things like your syllabus, your readings, your links, media, and assignments. So it's just there. It's available for students to read. The syllabus is great to include in a Canvas shell because you reduce having to pass out and waste a ton of paper in an in-person class passing out 30 syllabi on paper to your students. So the basic Canvas shell is already in place going forward into the fall. As I said, with DE and EVE, we know that the shift is not going to be modality, it's going to be shifting dates. We have all this stuff already built into our class. We may or may not be doing Zoom. And by the way, if we're talking about EVE, it's usually DE plus Zoom, okay? So that's kind of the difference in using Zoom, is that an EVE class takes it up to some level of Zoom use. What amount and when you do your Zooms is kind of up to you. So with DE, again, we're shifting dates. The scenario is a late start. So we don't have to change any of this content in our class except for probably our assignment dates, and I gave you that trick. Use this trick of 6 steps to very quickly and efficiently change all the dates in your class. And I'm happy to do a workshop on that with you if you'd like that as well. So kind of glass half full rather than empty, as we might think right now, is the only thing you have to do is shift the dates in your DE class or EVE class at the assignment level. You don't have to change your syllabus, your readings, your modules. Very little that you have to do, just shift dates. So that's pretty good. Face-to-face, again, to go back to my concern here, I think is the number one concern I have right now, because there are a lot of different scenarios. Again, I'm not speaking for the college. I'm guessing. I'm thinking just from my own experience teaching in the district all these years and how I might deal with it. So it's just my one perspective, grain of salt, take it or leave it kind of thing. So face-to-face, we could imagine a number of different scenarios. We know right now that there definitely is going to be a shift, and I should have added to this maybe late start as well as temporary closure. So we're kind of dealing with that because we know we're going to be temporarily closed, at least from a teaching perspective. Offices will likely be open, but we're not starting on the 13th of September, we're starting on the 20th. So what we realize is that in that situation, we're going to just pick up our class we're not going to do actually a modality shift necessarily, although you never know, right? What if we had to teach 1 week distance or virtual just because, the fire isn't contained by the 20th? If that was the case, hypothetically, for a temporary period of time, let's say you have to teach virtually for 1 week and then go back face to face. What I think you could do is take your basic Canvas shell that you already have, nothing new there, and add this. Everything needed for that period of time. So if I am, and this takes me back to 2004, teaching in London, and one of the things we did there was we taught the first portion of our class totally virtual. So I did all this HTML creation and created all these classes and discussions on, at the time, Yahoo groups, dating myself and dating the technology. This was well before Canvas. But what we did was we created assignments and discussions and links to get students to think about what it's going to be like to live in London, what the experience will be like, some of the London history, the architecture, in my case, the archaeology, because I was teaching archaeology. So what I recommend for this is take your basic Canvas shell and add anything you need for that period of time. I really think it's primarily going to be one thing, I think it's going to be discussions. I think discussions are going to be what you will need to keep things going, let's say, for a week period. Again, I'm just guessing here. Add your discussions and say, we're going to talk about this, maybe your readings as well. So maybe discussions and readings. Really highlight, say, we're not meeting face-to-face for the first week, so we will have some online readings, and then we'll discuss this in class. Again, please, please, please understand this is not happening. I'm just like trying to think almost as a futurist, like what could happen? What if we were virtual for 1 week? What if we were virtual for 2 weeks? If we were virtual for 2 weeks and you go back in week 3 or week 4 to teach face-to-face, just build these out more. You would know that. The college would tell you, okay, we're going to be virtual for a period of 1 or 2 weeks. So what I would recommend is add what you need for that period of time, which is probably discussions and readings. Now, quarantine is really similar. So a quarantine is a situation. You're teaching face-to-face. We're back in person after the fires, whatever that looks like. But COVID breaks out. Worst case scenario. COVID breaks out in your class. The district makes a decision, the SLT group makes a decision that you have to go into a period of temporary quarantine with your class for 1 to 2 weeks. So you're no longer meeting in person, and then you have to move to DE or EVE. Well, just like this with this scenario where we start or have to move to virtual teaching for a short period of time before we go back to face-to-face, you're doing the exact same thing. You're probably building out your readings. You're building maybe some assignments. If you already had something planned, you could have your quiz still online, and then add in everything that you need for that period of time. And really, it's the discussion boards that you probably need, because that's going to keep you going. Or Zoom sessions as well. This is getting crazy here. I need to erase this, but it's kind of hurting my eyes. But anyway, you're going to keep things going with either text-based discussions in the Canvas discussion boards or Zoom sessions. So kind of think about that. If it was a full quarter shift, worst case scenario, and the college said, whether it's the start in fall on the 20th, or let's say COVID or some other catastrophe hits, we don't need any more right now, believe me, and the college says, okay, it's week 5, you need to finish out the rest of your class totally in DE or EVE. We actually did that, you recall. It was the last week of classes and finals week when COVID was hitting us. I remember we were in the university center doing our workshops, and the deans came in and kind of made the call, and the call went out to the faculty, hey, shift everything online. We did a great job, and pat yourselves on the back, because everybody adapted like so wonderfully to that uncertainty. So we can do this. We can totally do this with the face-to-face class. If we have a scenario where we have to move online, we can talk about this. We can have resources. We can do workshops. We don't have to sit and be pessimistic and say the glass is half empty. We can certainly be optimistic about it and say, what's the best case scenario that we can deal with these worst case scenarios where maybe it's not the ideal that we have to shift things as a college. So trying to think right now, I think that's all I have to say. I know that was kind of long, but I'm really trying to think this through, problem solve it a little bit here as a social scientist and also someone who's taught all these years. So good luck, and I know we'll talk more about this in the future. Okay, so that's it today with this tip video. Again, if something happens, I know there'll be notification from the college, but hopefully this might prepare you in the worst case scenario. If one of these things does take place, you can easily shift your class, whether that involves something as simple as shifting the dates in Canvas or a little heavier undertaking where you have to transform a face-to-face class into a fully DE or EVE course. So thanks for listening, and I'll be back with additional videos in this series.